Outlaw Law is brought to you by Whitaker and Hamer, attorneys and counselors at law. Your law firm for life.
The Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, back on the air. Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm, the power behind the program. Josh and Joe are managing partners at the firm, practicing attorneys here in the great state of North Carolina. Offices conveniently located in Raleigh, Garner, Clayton, Goldsboro, Fuquay, Varina, Gastonia, and Morehead City. Joining us remotely from Morehead City, we have Cassandra Nicholas, and in studio with us today, Taylor Scruggs-Smith. They are regulars on the program, and we have to give them proper billing. I'm Morgan Patrick, consumer advocate. If you've got a legal situation that you're facing and you've got some questions, we've got a phone number for you, 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Leave your contact info, briefly what the call is about, and an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch with you to talk about those questions. Also, you can email your questions to the show, questions@theoutlawlawyer.com. We'll answer them on a future program. Josh, take it away.
All right, Joseph. So we're going to talk about, this is our segment where we're going to talk about this Tesla manslaughter matter. And I've entitled this in our notes here, manslaughter versus machine, which I thought was pretty witty.
That's pretty good, man.
Yeah, I know. That was just on the cuff too, man. I didn't put a lot of thought into that. But so here, just to recap, back in 2019, Kevin Riyad was in his mid-20s and he was driving in Gardena, California in a Tesla Model S. He had engaged autopilot, and while in autopilot mode, he ran a red light and he crashed into a Honda Civic. The driver and the passenger in the Civic died at the scene. It also notes here they were on their first date, which is sad. But that was Orange County, California. That is a thing that happened, and this sounds like maybe the DA's office, the prosecutor down there, kind of struggled with what to charge. Right? Is that you don't have intent. We've talked about that before on the show. For a first degree murder, you need some intent, or you need something else. If it's an accidental, negligent killing, usually you're going more towards manslaughter. So it sounds like he's been charged with manslaughter. And the issue here is, hey, his argument, I guess, is going to be, I don't buy this argument very much, but his argument's going to be, he wasn't driving. He didn't do this. It's an accident. And he shouldn't be tried for manslaughter. He shouldn't be found guilty of manslaughter, maybe something a little less severe. But Joseph, you're the only person here I'm aware of that owns a Tesla.
Yeah, man, I care about the environment. It has nothing to do with wanting to drive really fast or anything like that. But
tell me about this autopilot mode. Tell me what this looks like in an actual Tesla.
Yeah, man. So this is the thing. My Tesla robot car is a very kind and gentle robot and would never hurt anybody. I want to start off by saying that. But the autopilot. So there's. I'm not an expert. I'm not a Tesla expert.
Sure.
Maybe I am. Maybe they could call me at trial. But there's a distinction. So there is a true autopilot program that it's an add-on that you can get when you have a Tesla, and it's an additional thing. You pay an additional cost for it. And so, when you're an idiot like me and you hear about that, you think well, I can just press this button, right? It's going to drive me around. I can just live my life. That's not how it works in practice. So you don't autopilot on city streets, really, meaning that it's not going to take hard turns for you. Basically, in my experience, the benefit of that, what it does for you is if you get on the highway or a freeway, when you're just kind of going straight or taking exits, it's going to notify you when an exit's coming up. It'll put your turn signal on. It can auto change lanes for you. In my experience of driving a Tesla, the robot does a much better job of driving than me myself. It's a robot, and it's very precise. And if anything, again, in my experience, it's overly cautious. So one of the complaints I have about it is it's going to slam on brakes if it even senses a red light or a flashing light or a stop sign. It's going to just completely, it's going to err on the side of caution, and you're going to start slowing down immediately. Now, the exception to that is you do have the ability to override the autopilot by putting your foot on the accelerator. So if you're coming up on a yellow light and you're I can make this, right, it's going to stop unless you put your foot down on the gas and make it again. You can override it at any point. So again, in my experience, the only way that I could see this taking place is if the individual in question pressed the gas, went through on their own, because my car would have literally thrown me through the windshield slamming on the brakes.
And am I correct that you have to be touching the steering wheel at all times?
That's the other thing. You don't have to touch the steering wheel at all times, but you will. It tells you that you engage autopilot. It tells you keep your hands on the wheel at all times. So there you go. There's a little bit of legal wrangling out of the gate. Like they're making the disclaimer that you need to be attentive. I know that the argument here is that it encourages you to be less attentive. And I mean, you can see why they make that argument. It's a logical argument, but they do warn against that immediately, telling you to keep your hands on the wheel. And then what happens is if you take your hands off the wheel it seemed like it was a longer period of time, but that's the thing with the Teslas is you get these periodic software updates. The most recent update, it's like 2 seconds. Your hands aren't on the wheel, or even if your hands are on the wheel, you have to apply pressure. So like I can have my hands on the wheel and still get a notification that it's about to disengage autopilot, and you have to kind of like tug on it a little bit to keep it going. So yeah, and it'll beep. It'll beep like crazy, and then if you do that long enough, it'll just start beeping like mad, and it'll tell you got to take control, and then it will disable autopilot for the rest of that drive. So you will not be able to do it. That's happened to me. Very upsetting.
Yeah. All right, Taylor, with that expert Tesla testimony, grand jury, you're the DA, you going with a higher murder charge, a manslaughter, or something less like vehicular manslaughter, or maybe even something less than that. What are you doing here if you're the DA?
I think if I'm the DA, I'm shocked they are going against Tesla in a certain sense, because at the same time, it's like, how are you going to prove mens rea, which is a fancy legal term in criminal law, talking about like the intent of the party, which Josh was referring to earlier. So it's like, you can't really prove mens rea or who committed what actions with a Tesla. The person that drove the car is the one that's bound by driver's license, had to take a test to get on. He's the one that has to be following the law, whether he knows it or not, because ignorance is not a defense. So I feel like it would be a higher murder charge, because even if, and it does, the argument is it encourages you to be inattentive, you're still the one that's in control of that vehicle. Sure. Even if you engaged autopilot, you're still the one that had to set your autopilot up, still manage the car with autopilot. You can't just say, this is a transformer, so I was driving the car and the machine was actually driving. Based off Joe's testimony, it clearly is showing that you still have to have some control of the car, and it will disengage on its own. So I feel like that's a higher murder charge. You can't really hold the robot accountable for not doing something.
Cassandra, what do you think? You've heard that. You've heard Joseph's expert testimony. You know very little about the facts, but the facts that you know, you're the prosecutor. You're the ADA. You got to charge this. What are you doing?
I don't necessarily think it would be a higher murder charge. I think manslaughter is the correct charge for this, just because there's too much at play. Manslaughter is something that the DA can much more reasonably get, that we don't need to really get into all the nitty-gritty of the Tesla stuff if it's a manslaughter charge. That's a lot more achievable.
I think it's the same. I think you look at it just like you look at any other vehicular accident, incident like this. I think it's the exact same. I think we treat it the same. It's the operator of the machine, right? So like Josh, let's just theoretical. Say I run you over with a lawnmower, right? And a lawnmower. Though? Yeah. Say I do that and you die, and it's an accident. Clearly,
is there a hidden meaning there?
No, definitely not.
Nowhere.
He's right across from me, man. This is the first person I saw. But I run you over with a lawnmower. Just forwards, not backwards. So it's an accident. Right. Yeah, you're laying in the grass. You're playing a prank on me, and you're going to pop out from the grass while I'm cutting it. Anyways, it's the same. It's the same concept. I can't. Even if it's an autonomous lawnmower, like you have an operator that's in control of this thing. The technology is not to the point. Maybe this raises a more interesting question in the future when potentially the technology could be to the point where you have full autonomous drive. Because I could see this being a more relevant question in a situation where you don't have these disclaimers, where it's widely accepted in the industry that someone can get behind the wheel of a Tesla, press a button, fall asleep. And they have, that's a different scenario than what we're dealing with here. Here, it's clearly disclaimed, like you're in control. You need to be attentive. You need to pay attention. And I don't necessarily think the criminal aspect of this is what's the most interesting piece. I think the civil suit that they're bringing against Tesla? That's the more interesting question. And I think it's the same. It's the same discussion, right? And I still think there's not really liability there.
We'll get to the civil stuff because I was going to bring that up in a minute. Before I bring that up, though, my thought was engaging autopilot is kind of like the same decision, I think, as if like I took my 8-year-old and put him in my lap and said, "Hey, you drive."
Yeah. So that almost sounds like that's more negligent.
You think that's reckless negligence?
No, man. I press that button every day and I feel great about it. I feel really good. I'm be honest, man. I feel safe. I feel too safe almost, but I'm attentive and I'm paying attention.
Right.
And
yeah, you're still.
Elon's response to this is interesting because he specifically says that this is evidence they need to move towards fully autonomous software sooner rather than later to save more lives.
I don't disagree with that if the software is up to snuff, and I think it's not there yet. But I 1,000,000% think that if you develop really good robot software, it's going to drive way better than like 45% of the morons that are driving out there today. We've all seen those people.
There's some bad drivers
They're
out
terrible.
there.
And as the millennial, I automatically hear hacker.
Yeah, it's fine. I think the hackers will drive better than a lot of these morons, honestly.
But that is, there's, and again, I didn't read this part of it, but there definitely is there an active, I know there's a Department of Justice probe into Tesla, but I don't know if there's any active, I'm assuming there is somewhere, and I just haven't read about it. But is Tesla getting sued for this? Is there?
It says in this article that you found, Josh. So I can't say how accurate it is, but it says that the family of the deceased is suing Tesla in this case.
I think that's
Civilly.
tough, man. I mean, maybe they settle something like that just to make it go away. But I mean, if Tesla has to field every time, autopilot's involved with some kind of accident, if they've got to field a civil case every time, that seems like it's going to be burdensome.
Yeah, I don't disagree, man.
Sounds like car insurance is going to go up.
Yeah, just don't raise the price on that autopilot subscription.
What does that run you?
It's not the cheapest thing in the world, man. But it's worth it. I'll tell you that. It's worth it.
Yeah.
It's good.
But if you don't pay, they just cut it off, right?
Yeah, they just cut it off. And you still get like the maintain lane. Like there's still features
everybody's
that
got that.
Not everybody's
Not
got
everybody.
that, Josh. Yeah.
I turned it off.
Yeah. Do you drive a giant old Ford Transit van to transport your 50 children places? Because I tell you, I don't have it.
No. I turned that off in my car because that makes me mad because I'm not going to signal if there's no one around me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to turn on my turn signal, and it hates that.
Yeah, it beeps at you.
Yeah, it really.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna lie, I mean, I've gotten pretty mad at that'd be a case. Man murders robot. Because that's what's gonna happen if my car keeps beeping at me.
The Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm, managing partners at the firm, or practicing attorneys here in North Carolina. Our guests on the program, and they're basically co-hosts. Cassandra Nicholas is at the Morehead City office, and we have Taylor Scruggs-Smith here in studio with us. Office is conveniently located Raleigh, Garner, Clayton, Goldsboro, Fuquay, Varina, Gastonia, and Morehead City. If you are facing a legal situation, you've got some questions, we've got a phone number for you, 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. You can also just leave your contact information, briefly what that call's about. An attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. You can email your questions to the show. We'll answer them on a future program. Questions@theoutlawlawyer.com. We'll have more for you coming up next.